What is up, everybody? This is Alex from IHE TV. And today I'm talking about the 1984 film directed by Wim Wenders, Paris, Texas. An absolute classic I somehow hadn't seen yet. I've only actually seen one other Wim movie, and I think it's one of my favorite movies of the past 5 years or so, that being Perfect Days. This is probably his most famous and beloved film, considered sort of a neo-Western travel drama, of course led first and foremost by Harry Dean Stanton, who gives an incredible performance. So for this video I'm going to try something a little bit different. I know it's not like a contemporary slop movie that's fun to make fun of. I'm going to talk about something good, and I will be spoiling the film. Even though it's decades old, I still think you should probably check this out. If you're into slower, quiet character studies, this will definitely be up your alley. And I've got a bunch of some of my favorite shots in the movie as images that can help guide the discussion as I go through it, but obviously this will be spoiled the deeper I go into it. So the basic framing is that Harry Dean Stanton is just a lone wanderer in the desert of Texas, and I always found the name quite enticing when I would see this or have a look at this IMDb page without knowing the context. Like, what does Paris have to do with Texas? Not knowing that there is technically a place. I looked on Google Maps. It's like a place that does exist in Texas. But the way that works itself into the narrative framing is really clever, and he does something similar in Perfect Days, where in that instance it's a tape motif and the idea of rewinding the tape, like the character in that movie is rewinding his days, whereas the Paris, Texas idea here is more about the idea of a fantasy, a trickery, where the first thing that conjures into your mind when you hear Paris is the illustrious city that a lot of Americans kind of romanticize, but then the harsh reality of it being kind of in the middle of nowhere in Texas is very much symbolic of what this main character is searching for and going through. And I'm particularly interested about hearing people's different interpretations of this character, because I've read a lot of stuff concluding that it's sort of a redemptive story, whereas to me, kind of what was so clever about it was the way, in my mind anyway, this character shifts from being the protagonist almost into the antagonist the deeper you get into the movie, because the whole mystery as to why he's in the position he is in is pretty much kept under lock and key for most of the movie up until the last 20-30 minutes or so. And there's this whole wrong place, right time inertia to the story where this character wasn't really looking to go through what he's going through. He's not really proactive. Everything kind of happens to him and he's forced into these situations, and his reaction to it says a lot about him as a person. So what I mean by that is the film opens on him in this very unusual outfit, this bright red cap popping against the beautiful scenery, and my god, the scenery in this movie is absolutely jaw-dropping. Shot by Robbie Mueller, who I think the only other thing I've seen that he's done the cinematography for is Dancer in the Dark, another excellent movie, not really similar to this one, visually anyway, quite stylistically different, but showing off some range for sure. But yeah, great narrative hook. As far as the simplicity of it, it's not doing anything unusual with the structure. It's quite a linear story. But for me, it was always interesting as far as like, what has this guy gone through? You have this instinctual sympathy because he just seems so lost, and there's something so sad and melancholic about the way he's carrying himself. And he's mute for the first 30-40 minutes of the movie, doesn't say a word. And even when his brother does show up in the picture, he barely talks to him or won't give him the context as to what happened for the last 4 years with him disappearing. So yeah, the combination of that hook with all of this landscape photography hooked me immediately, as well as, I think I just flashed it on the screen a second ago, this slide guitar soundtrack. Ry Cooder does an amazing job. I love when a film will just establish a rich atmosphere that I just like existing in, and it doesn't feel like it needs to rush along to anything. That's sitting in a mood without, to me, feeling self-indulgent. So he makes his way into a small town, crunches on some ice and passes out, and wakes up in this doctor's office with this guy that looks like the colonel. I think he's German. And that is an interesting thing about this movie. It's obviously set in America, and the main character's American, and most of the main characters are American. But obviously it's a German director, and I think it's a French-German production. So it's very much a European perspective on the idea of America, which I find very interesting, because obviously America's DNA does go back to these places, but also the attitudes and the approach to the kind of romanticization or the ideas of, especially what was going on in the 80s, is quite different and just gives it a unique slant. It doesn't feel like a typical 80s depiction of America. In fact, a lot of people interpret this character as being more of a ghost than a person, which I totally get. And there's something about his being brought back to life almost by a doctor that I guess is symbolic of where his journey moves next. Yeah, and look, so many just great landscape shots. There is something isolating, but there is something romantic about it, just with how desolate, and it is like he's in a form of purgatory, just wandering around. He doesn't have an objective. Even when his brother meets up with him, he just walks off down the train tracks. I didn't take a screenshot of that, but that's another great shot. Yeah, so his brother only gets pulled into the story because of this German doctor who called him up because of a phone number he found in his wallet. So obviously him hearing this news, anyone would go and travel to rescue their brother if they just vanished out of the blue 4 years ago. Yeah, and this is shortly before he quote-unquote escapes again and just wanders off by himself, just keeping it so intriguing, so questionable as to how possibly someone could be in this position and be so cold and distant from their own family in this way. Oh no, I did get a train tracks one. Look at that, it's just stunning stuff. Everything feeding into these central ideas of the hopelessness, the loss, the emptiness. Love when an environment can feed into a character's motivations or be symbolic of where they are as a person. Yeah, I thought this was a really cool shot. It's extreme composition where it's mostly sky, but in motion it's obviously got the motion blur, just making these characters feel so small. Yeah, so here's where the Paris, Texas thing starts getting some context, where Harry Dean Stanton's character has this rolled up photograph in his pocket of a plot of land that he bought years ago in Paris, Texas, and that there's a running gag with their father as to that's where he got together with their mother. And he liked to make jokes about saying, oh yeah, we met in Paris. Pause. Texas. And how funny you'd find that. So obviously this place to him is romanticized in his head as what family and connection means to him. And yeah, put a pin in the romanticized perspective as we move forward. Yeah, I thought this was a cool shot. Very vibe heavy, but there's also an ongoing fantastic use of color and costume design. And by the way, this is all from like the first watch. I feel like there's a lot more you could pick up and delve into on a second one. I've read that from people. So the fact I picked up this much on a first watch is telling in and of itself, I feel. So then the story shifts when they get back to his brother's house in California, where you think he stands out in the desert in that red cap. He just doesn't belong here. And even this shot kind of emphasizes that with this wall literally between them as he's listening in on them talking about him and how he doesn't sleep. Another bit of evidence as to why he might be a more ghostly, ethereal type character, but the mystery is still held firm. But the plot develops more so with, you find out he has a son that he abandoned and his brother and his wife had taken over and have been looking after the kid and are basically the kid's parents at this point. And from what we see are doing a pretty good job. Yeah, shout out obviously to his performance, but because it's such a quiet character that doesn't have a lot of dialogue to, get all melodramatic and be like, this is my past, da-da-da-da-da, it's so big and dramatic. It's almost the complete inverse. It's almost entirely about his body language and his facial performance. It's so subtle and clever, and this was a cool scene where he's cleaning everybody's shoes while watching planes and soaking in a completely different type of vista than that of the desert. Yeah, this is what I mean about the facial acting. This is not even a moving frame, but I feel like it says so much. There's pain and history etched into every wrinkle on his face. So then the story kind of morphs into something that avoids being corny with this whole like absent father trying to connect with his son angle, but they give it these layers of cleverness. Like he borrows this outfit from his brother and kind of plays dress up dad, which again I think is like a symbolic idea where I felt like he didn't really earn this opportunity or moment, but he's just kind of seeing where it goes. And yeah, this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie where he kind of picks him up from school, and again the visual symbolism of them walking on different sides of the road. There's some really charming moments where they're kind of copying each other. It's a bit more of a hopeful slant to the movie. It doesn't feel quite as empty and isolated as that beginning part. There's a bit of heart to it with them kind of coming together and his son sort of being won over by him and trusting him. Then after a montage of his brother showing him all of these old photographs of his ex, the mother of this boy, he basically kidnaps his son. I know his son wants to do it and go find his mum, but obviously he's a child and it's, in my opinion, a wildly inappropriate thing to do. There's a great scene with the walkie-talkies where the kid sat in the back talking to his dad, kind of foreshadowing a later scene coming up. Yeah, this one here. They basically learn from his brother's wife that Stanton's ex has been depositing money every month from her job to give to the boy, and gives a time and place as to where she might be for the deposit. So they track down her car and figure out that she works, in fact, at a peep show. So the mystery starts to become unraveled and you get more context as to who he is as a person. And the choice to have these characters reunite in a location where they have this barrier between them, where they can't properly interact, where, again, it makes him feel like he's not even there. He is like a ghostly presence. And so when she comes out and he sees her in this situation, you see a different side of him than before. He gets upset. He starts asking about other men and getting jealous, giving you some clues as to maybe why he's in the situation that he's in. He ends up kind of leaving in a huff, going to this bar, and you learn some context about his father being an alcoholic, and his response to coming to terms with what has happened is for him to hit the bottle too. Man, this looks just like a Western here. Very cool stuff. Interesting to note that his answer to being faced with reality that's no longer through the innocent eyes of a child brings him straight to the bar. This idealized world that he's built instantly coming crashing down. And that's what I mean about like the irresponsible, darker side of this character, where he's just left this kid out on the trunk of his car while he's boozing it up inside. I know it is the 80s, like the way people treated kids was obviously different, but I don't think the film is unaware of this, and it's confident enough to leave how you feel about this situation kind of up to the viewer. So let me move on to perhaps the best scene in the movie. Like, I do really like this scene, but I think this return to the peep show. And Natasha Kinski, who is only in, 2 scenes in the entire movie, but the performance is incredible. How much you learn and feel towards her is so strong in such a short amount of time. And the emotional range of both of these actors playing off each other is so wide, because she does start off in a more playful, I mean, she's doing her job, you know? But as Harry Dean Stanton starts going into maybe the best monologue in the film, I didn't note it down specifically, but talking about what happened between them, effectively, and doing it in third person too, which is interesting. And watching the look on her face change the moment she realizes who she's talking to. Yeah, again, with the face acting, all of that history, all of those years washing over her, which then leads into probably the best shot in the film, by using these mirrors and reflections, and again, not allowing them to touch or physically be in the same room, keeping a distance between them, which I guess you could argue feeds more into his redemptive qualities, where he's coming at it from I know I can't really come back from what I've done, but I'm here now, and this kind of attempt at a goodbye, but also at the same time there's something selfish about it, and giving his side of the story, revealing that his jealousy drove him to be quite an abusive, awful partner to her, shifting to her, giving her perspective back. A very emotionally complicated and dense scene, so simple and performance-led. This is like amazing stuff. With him eventually revealing that he has their son in a hotel room. He gives her the number of the hotel room and says he's waiting for you, basically. So again, he stays isolated, like in a parking lot, just watching the view of the hotel where these characters reunite. And again, which is, I don't know, quite emotionally complicated to me too, because obviously she still cares about her son. She's been sending the money all this time, but maybe she wasn't in a position or place for this to be thrust into her life in the way it was, and this kid definitely wasn't. So that's what I mean about him being more of a selfish character, where he's kind of just thrust this into their lives in the same way he sort of blew it apart before. But obviously the love of a mother and seeing her reunite is hopeful, but I don't know, it's still heartbreaking to me. How like the biggest victims to me are obviously the kid, and actually his brother and his brother's wife, who are also victims because of his choices and what he does, which is how I kind of interpret this last shot of the movie where he drives off on his own, to me coming to accept that he's kind of fucked it, and that this idealistic idea of this plot of land in Paris, Texas, and the idea that he'd almost convinced himself that there was some hope in reuniting his family and there being this Hollywood happy ending, like, is dissolved before his eyes through this scene, when he actually has to verbalize his history and see her reactions to reliving all of it and seeing that pain wash over her again. An extremely sad story that, while slow, is still super punchy and impactful. Great lighting too, by the way. Like a great... Only through these frames have I really noticed how much like green and blue is baked into it. Yeah, this is a special film. I gave this a very strong 4-star on Letterboxd. Even just talking it through for this video is kind of making me feel like I should bump it up. I would happily watch this again, despite its pretty long runtime. That lead performance is so strong. I like the emotional roller coaster of it, how patient and quiet it is. Let me know your thoughts on this movie, if you enjoyed this video, if you agree with my conclusions on this character, if you see it as more hopeful, more matter of fact. I don't know, maybe it'll wash over me differently on a rewatch at some point. But very clever. Let me know any other Wim Wenders movies I should check out too. Hope you enjoyed this video. Probably talk about some slop next. Bye.